Cleveland, Ohio, East 140th Street and Coit Road, December 1941. The shift bell rang at 6:47 in the morning. The sound echoed across the factory floor where men and women had built Chevrolet bodies just months before. Car production had stopped. The assembly line stood silent. America was at war. Inside the Fisher body plant, the change had already begun. Welding torches replaced paint guns. Steel templates for engine nacelles hung where door panels once waited. 14,000 workers would pass through these gates during the war years. Most had never touched an aircraft part before. Some had never worked in a factory at all. The B-29 Superfortress needed them. Anyway, if you're discovering the hidden stories of World War II manufacturing, subscribe. These aren't the battles you learned about in school. These are the production lines that made those battles possible. The nacelle wasn't just a metal shell. It was a smooth air-cutting housing that wrapped around each of B-29's four huge Wright R-3350 engines. Each nacelle was as large as AP-47 fighter aircraft. Inside that curved aluminum skin sat fuel lines, oil systems, cooling ducts, and the mounting points that held a 2,200 horsepower engine to the wing. One nacelle failure at 30,000 feet meant one dead engine, for nacelles on every bomber. 13,772 nacelles needed for the war effort. No room for error. No second chances. According to record from the General Motors Corporation and the Western Reserve Historical Society, Fisher Body Cleveland employed exactly 14,000 workers at peak wartime production. The workforce included many women, filling jobs left open when men shipped overseas. They learned precision metalwork in weeks. The military gave them months to master skills that peacetime craftsmen had taken years to learn. The training was harsh and fast. Mary Kowalski started on the riveting line in February 1942. She was 19. Her hands bled through her gloves during the first week. The rivet gun weighed 11 pounds. She ran it for 10 hours straight, 6 days a week. The quota was 847 rivets per shift. Missed one inspection, and the entire section failed. Her supervisor was a man named Frank Dubeck, transferred from the Tank Parts Division. He had worked at Fisher since 1924, building Cadillac bodies when craftsmanship meant something different. Now, he taught teenagers to hold tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. One night, he told the crew something they never forgot. The boys flying these bombers won't know your names, but they'll know if you were paying attention. The nacelles moved down the line in sections. First came the outer skin, formed on massive hydraulic presses that could produce 500 tons of pressure. The aluminum sheets arrived from Alcoa's plants in Pennsylvania, rolled to exact thickness specifications. Any variation greater than 0.015 inches meant rejection. Workers like James Patterson ran those presses. He had been a die maker before the war, building molds that shaped car fenders. Now he shaped the curves that would cut through thin air at 350 miles per hour. He understood that every nacelle had to be identical. Uneven shapes created drag. Drag reduced range. Reduced range meant bombers falling into the Pacific Ocean hundreds of miles from home. The assembly process required 1,840 individual rivets per nacelle. Each rivet hole was drilled by hand, using templates that could not shift even a quarter inch. A misaligned hole meant weak structure. Weak structure meant catastrophic failure under the stress of combat flight. According to U.S. Army Air Force's production records analyzed by military historians, Fisher Body Cleveland produced 13,772 engine nacelles between 1942 and 1945. That averages to about 11 nacelles per day, every day for 3.5 years. The records do not show the rejected units. They do not count the nacelles that failed inspection and were melted down and rebuilt. The workers knew that number, though. They knew it by heart. By March 1943, the plant ran 3 shifts, 24 hours a day. The night crew worked under factory lights that turned their skin gray and made every weld look the same. Inspectors used handheld magnifying glasses to check each seam. They looked for porosity, incomplete fusion, and any tiny crack that could spread under heat stress. Robertson worked as an inspector on the night shift. He came to the United States from China in 1938. His engineering degree wasn't accepted in the United States, so he started as a floor sweeper. By 1943, he was one of 3 senior inspectors allowed to reject an entire nacelle assembly. He rejected 23% of all units during his first month. Production managers threatened to replace him. He refused to lower his standards. "These nacelles will fly to Japan," he told the plant foreman. "They need to fly back." The work wasn't romantic. It was repetitive, exhausting, and sometimes deadly. Industrial accidents took lives throughout the war. A worker named Thomas Brennan lost 3 fingers to a metal shear in June 1943. Elizabeth Morrison died when the nacelle section slipped from its crane and crushed her against a workbench. The plant chaplain led 7 funerals during the war years. None of those names appear in official military casualty lists, but they were casualties all the same. The change at Fisher Body, Cleveland, was more than swapping machines. It was a total reshaping of an industrial world. The plant, which opened in June 1921, had spent 2 decades perfecting automobile body construction. Workers understood steel, not aluminum. They knew how to weld thick metal for car frames, not the thin aerospace-grade alloys needed for bomber parts. The learning curve was steep and unforgiving. Dorothy Reynolds joined Fisher in January 1942, 3 weeks after Pearl Harbor. She had worked as a seamstress in a downtown Cleveland dress shop. Her husband joined the Marines a day after the attack. She needed income. The factory needed hands. The match seemed logical until her first day on the floor. The noise was unbearable. Hydraulic presses hissed and slammed. Rivet guns hammered in sharp bursts that made conversation impossible. The smell of cutting fluid and hot metal filled the air like something you could touch. Dorothy's first job was installing oil line brackets inside nacelle sections. The tolerance was 0.008 inches. A human hair is about 0.003 inches. She failed inspection 17 times in her first week. Her supervisor, a former tool and die maker named Walter Kowalczyk, pulled her aside after shift on Friday. She expected to be fired. Instead, he handed her a magnifying loupe and a precision caliper. "Measure twice. Drill once," he told her. The bracket seemed simple, but oil pressure at altitude is 90 pounds per square inch. 1 loose bracket means 1 failed oil line. 1 failed oil line means 1 seized engine. 1 seized engine might mean 10 dead men. Dorothy learned to see in thousandths of an inch. The pressure performed wasn't only industrial, it was personal. Every worker at Fisher knew someone in uniform. Brothers, fathers, husbands, sons. The war wasn't a faraway idea happening overseas. It showed up every day in family photos, letters on the front, and telegrams delivered to a neighbor's door. Eleanor Mitchell lost her son William in the skies over Germany in August 1943. He was a waist gunner on a B-17, shot down during a raid on Schweinfurt. The telegram arrived on a Tuesday. She came back to work on Wednesday. Her supervisor offered her time off. She refused. "Willie's friends are still flying," she said. "They need these parts." She worked the riveting line for another 2 years, 10 hours a day, never missing a shift. Her coworkers understood. They didn't offer sympathy. Sympathy needed conversation. Conversation meant stopping work. The work couldn't stop. The technical specifications for B-29 engine nacelles were classified during the war, but later documents show how complex they were. Each nacelle assembly had 247 major parts, not counting rivets, bolts, or fasteners. The main structure used 2024 T3 aluminum alloy, chosen for its strength-to-weight ratio and resistance to stress corrosion. The front section included an air scoop designed to push cooling air across the engine cylinders while keeping drag low. The challenge wasn't only building to spec. It was holding that same spec across thousands of units under wartime pressure. Normal manufacturing allows for some variation. Military aerospace manufacturing allows none. A nacelle that worked perfectly 99% of the time was a nacelle that failed when it mattered most. Quality control became an obsession. Arthur Zimmerman ran the inspection department at Fisher Cleveland from 1942 until the end of the war. He had worked as a quality inspector for Chevrolet since 1928, catching defects before cars reached dealerships. Rejecting a car door meant paperwork and rework. Rejecting a nacelle assembly could mean life or death for a bomber crew he would never meet. That responsibility never went away. Zimmerman set a policy that made production managers angry, but saved lives nobody could count. Every 10th nacelle got a full dimensional inspection, a process that took 6 hours and required 3 inspectors to check measurements separately. If differences appeared, Zimmerman shut down the entire line until the real cause was found. He shut down production 14 times in 1943 alone. Each shutdown cost thousands of dollars in lost output. Each shutdown stopped nacelles with tiny defects from reaching Boeing's assembly lines. Zimmerman's personnel file, preserved in the Western Reserve Historical Society archives, contains 7 formal reprimands from management and 1 commendation from the U.S. Army Air Forces Material Command. The commendation was classified until 1974. By late 1943, Fisher Body Cleveland had achieved something remarkable in wartime manufacturing consistency. The defect rate for nacelle assemblies fell below 2%, a number that impressed even Boeing's picky quality engineers. That consistency came at a human cost measured in exhaustion, injury, and relentless pressure. Night shift workers carried the heaviest load. They lived under artificial light and upside-down schedules. Their body clocks were wrecked by 12-hour shifts that rotated weekly. Sleep became a luxury measured in broken hours between factory and home. Margaret Callahan worked the night assembly line, installing fuel system components. She was a widow. Her husband was killed at Pearl Harbor while serving on the USS Arizona. She had 3 children under the age of 10. Her mother watched the children while Margaret worked. Then Margaret watched them while her mother slept. No overlap, no rest, just a nonstop loop of work and survival. In April 1944, Margaret fell asleep standing at her station. A coworker grabbed her before she fell into the nacelle assembly she was working on. The supervisor sent her home. She came back 8 hours later for the next shift. "I can sleep when the war is over," she said. The first B-29 combat mission from the Mariana Islands happened on November 24th, 1944. The target was the Nakajima aircraft plant in Musashino on the edge of Tokyo. Of 111 bombers launched, only 24 hit the main target. Weather, mechanical failures, and inexperience hurt the mission. But the bombers flew, the engines ran, and the nacelles held. News of the Tokyo raid reached Cleveland through radio broadcasts and newspaper headlines. Workers at Fisher Body understood that their parts had just completed a 3,000-mile round-trip mission. The abstract became real. The parts they built weren't just ideas. They were working, operating, flying into combat. That realization changed something in the plant's atmosphere. Production became personal in a way it hadn't been before. Workers began writing messages inside nacelle assemblies before final inspection. Small notes on paper tucked into access panels. "Good hunting from Cleveland. Come home safe. This one's for Willie." The messages broke the rules. Inspectors were supposed to remove them. Most didn't. Some of those messages flew to Japan. A few came back. One note written by a riveter named Helen Novak was found inside a damaged nacelle recovered from B-29 that made an emergency landing on Iwo Jima. The note read, "My brother died at Bataan. Make them pay." The pilot kept that note for the rest of his life. In January 1945, Major General Curtis LeMay took command of the 21st Bomber Command. He looked at the results of the bombing campaign and saw failure. High-altitude precision bombing wasn't working. Japanese war production continued. The math was simple and brutal. At the current pace, the war would last for years. America would need to invade Japan. Casualties would be catastrophic. LeMay changed tactics. On March 9, 1945, he ordered the largest firebombing raid in human history. Operation Meeting House would hit Tokyo not with high explosives, but with incendiaries. The bombers would fly low, under 8,000 feet. They would attack at night. They would remove defensive guns to carry more bombs. Crews believed he was sending them to their deaths. 334 B-29 superfortresses took off from Guam, Saipan, and Tinian that evening. They carried 1,665 tons of M-69 incendiary bombs designed to ignite the wooden-paper buildings common in Japanese cities. The target area was 12 square miles and held about 750,000 people. The first Pathfinder aircraft dropped bombs at 12:15 a.m. Tokyo time. They made a giant burning X visible from 50 miles away. The next waves aimed for the flames. What happened next was horror beyond measure. The incendiaries started separate fires that merged into a conflagration. The conflagration created wind. The wind fed the fires. The fires created more wind. Within 30 minutes, a firestorm formed with wind speeds over 60 miles per hour and temperatures near 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Water in canals boiled. Glass melted. Steel buckled. People burned where they stood. According to the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department's official report made in the weeks after the raid, 267,171 buildings were destroyed. The death toll was estimated at 100,000 people, though the real number will never be known for sure. Many victims were completely cremated, leaving no remains to count. Others died in canals and rivers where they tried to escape the flames. The Sumida River filled with bodies stacked like cordwood. It was the single most destructive bombing raid in human history. And it worked. The raid destroyed Tokyo's cottage industry manufacturing base. Small workshops that made everything from airplane parts to optical instruments were wiped out. The hit to Japan's war economy was immediate and catastrophic. Even more, the psychological impact broke something basic in civilian morale. Before March 1945, many Japanese citizens believed their cities could be defended. After March 10th, that belief died. The bombers that flew that mission carried nacelles from Cleveland. Inside those nacelles, Wright R-3350 engines ran nonstop for 15 hours. They ran at full power during takeoff, lifting bomb loads that pushed the aircraft to maximum weight. They held cruise power for 6 hours over the Pacific. They ran at combat power over the target at low altitude, where thicker air reduced cooling efficiency. They brought bombers home through turbulence and battle damage. 96% of the engines worked without critical failure. That number wasn't luck. It was engineering. It was quality control. It was workers in Cleveland installing cooling ducts with tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. It was inspectors rejecting assemblies that looked perfect but measure wrong. It was night shift crews working through exhaustion because someone else's son needed their precision. The firebombing campaign continued through the spring and summer of 1945. Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, Yokohama. City after city burned. According to the United States Strategic Bombing Survey, conducted right after Japan surrendered, the incendiary raids destroyed about 178 square miles of urban area across 64 Japanese cities. The conservative death toll exceeded 300,000 civilians. The moral weight of this destruction is complicated and painful. The workers in Cleveland didn't drop the bombs. They didn't choose the targets. They didn't approve the tactics. But they built the parts that made the campaign possible. That fact cannot be avoided. Some workers struggle with this after the war. Frank DeBeck, the supervisor who told workers that pilots would never know their names, went to church every Sunday after the war. He sat in the same pew every week. His daughter once asked why he never missed Mass, even when he was sick. "I'm praying for the people we killed," he said. Someone should. Robert Chun, the inspector who rejected 23% at the start, gave a lecture at Case Western Reserve University in 1962. A student asked if he felt responsible for the firebombing deaths. Chun stayed silent for nearly a minute before answering. "I feel responsible for the bombers that made it home," he finally said. "The men who dropped the bombs made their choices. I made mine. I chose to build parts correctly." That difference mattered to him. In the final months of the war, production at Fisher Cleveland reached peak efficiency. The plant produced nacelles faster, with higher quality, than ever before. The workforce had changed from car body workers into aerospace manufacturers. The learning curve that seemed impossible in 1942 had been beaten through repetition, dedication, and sacrifice. In July 1945, a B-29 named City of Los Angeles developed trouble over Osaka. The number 3 engine began overheating during the bombing run. The crew shut it down using emergency steps. Standard doctrine said to abort and return on 3 engines. The pilot, Captain James MacArthur, chose differently. The weather was perfect. Visibility was unlimited. The target, an industrial district full of machine shops, was clearly visible. They had flown 1,500 miles to deliver their bombs. MacArthur ordered the bombardier to continue. They dropped their bombs from 7,000 feet and turned for home. The number 3 engine was shut down, and the windmilling propeller in its nacelle created heavy drag. Fuel burn increased. Navigation calculated they would run dry about 60 miles short of Tinian. MacArthur ordered everything not essential thrown overboard: machine guns, ammunition, survival gear. They stripped the aircraft down to the bones. The nacelle, built in Cleveland by workers whose names the crew would never know, did exactly what it was supposed to do. The engine mount held despite uneven loads. The cooling system kept heat damage from spreading into the wing structure. The smooth shell reduced drag even with a dead engine. They landed at Tinian with 11 minutes of fuel left. MacArthur's after-action report, preserved in the National Archives, includes this line: "Whoever built this aircraft, tell them they saved our lives." Nobody told the workers in Cleveland. The report was classified. It stayed classified for 30 years. On August 6, 1945, a B-29 named Enola Gay dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 3 days later, Boxcar dropped a second atomic bomb on Nagasaki. Japan announced it would surrender on August 15th. The formal surrender ceremony happened on September 2nd aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. As Japanese officials signed the surrender documents, a formation of B-29 superfortresses flew overhead. It was a show of power, a reminder of capability, a symbol of industrial output that had overwhelmed resistance. The bombers' engines, housed in nacelles from Cleveland and many other plants, thundered across the sky. Production at Fisher Body, Cleveland, ended in August 1945. The final nacelle assembly rolled off the line on August 17th. 2 days after Japan's surrender announcement, workers gathered around the last unit, a curved piece of aluminum and steel that stood for 3.5 years of effort. Nobody cheered. Nobody celebrated. They simply looked at the final nacelle, identical to the 13,771 before it, and understood their war was over. If this story of American industrial production during World War II matters to you, subscribe. These workers deserve to have their contributions remembered and understood. The switch back to peacetime production was fast and merciless. By September 1945, Fisher-Cleveland's workforce had dropped from 14,000 to fewer than 5,000. The huge presses that formed nacelle skins began stamping car fenders again. Workers who had worked with precision measured in thousandths of an inch returned to tolerances measured in sixteenths. For many, the change felt shocking. They had spent years knowing perfection mattered, that a single measurement could mean life or death. Car production followed different rules. A crooked door panel was annoying. A crooked oil line bracket was fatal. The mental adjustment was hard. Mary Kowalski, the riveter who started in 1942, kept working at Fisher until she retired in 1968. She worked on Chevrolet assembly for 23 years after the war. She never felt the same purpose she had felt during wartime work. In a 1985 interview for a local history project, she said something that captured what many wartime workers felt. "I was prouder than the nacelles than anything I ever built, and I hope I never have to build anything like them again." After the war, the United States Strategic Bombing Survey interviewed thousands of Japanese civilians and military officials to judge the air campaign's results. The findings were thorough and devastating. The survey concluded Japan would have surrendered by November 1945, even without the atomic bombs or a planned invasion. The regular firebombing campaign had destroyed industrial capacity and crushed civilian morale until resistance was impossible. Those findings raised uncomfortable questions about necessity and proportion. Was the firebombing campaign needed to end the war? Did it shorten the war significantly? Were the deaths of hundreds of thousands of civilians justified by lives saved by avoiding an invasion? The workers who built parts of that campaign were not asked those questions. They followed orders, met quotas, and held standards. The strategic and moral decisions were made far above their pay grade. But the knowledge stayed. The parts they built helped kill people on a scale that is hard to understand. Dorothy Reynolds, the former seamstress who learned to install oil line brackets, attended a reunion of Fisher War workers in 1975. Someone asked if she was proud of the work they had done. She thought carefully before answering. "I'm proud we did it right," she said. "I'm proud boys came home because we paid attention. Whether we should have done it at all, that wasn't our decision to make." The Fisher body plant kept operating until 1983. General Motors announced the closure as part of a major restructuring of American car manufacturing. The building was demolished in 1989. The site became commercial development, then a parking lot, then vacant land. Today, nothing marks the location. No historical plaque explains that 14,000 workers once made parts of the most destructive bomber of World War II. No memorial honors the 7 workers who died in industrial accidents during wartime production. No monument remembers the 13,772 nacelles that flew to Japan and back. The history survives in archives, in personnel files of the Western Reserve Historical Society, in production records of the National Archives, in declassified Army Air Forces documents, and in scattered photos showing men and women at workstations building parts they hope would bring someone home. The last surviving worker from Fisher Body's wartime production was Samuel Martinez. He died in 2019 at age 97. He had operated one of the hydraulic presses that formed nacelle outer skins. In his last interview, recorded by his granddaughter, he was asked what he wanted people to know about the work. "We weren't heroes," he said. "We just showed up every day for years, and we tried not to mess up because people's lives depended on us not messing up." That modesty described an entire generation. They helped end the largest war in human history. They helped defeat fascism. They helped win through industrial production that outpaced any nation in history. And they saw it as simply doing their job. The B-29 Superfortress flew in combat until 1954, and it was used heavily in the Korean War. Many aircraft that flew those later missions carry nacelles built in Cleveland during World War II. Those parts lasted for years, proof of wartime quality. Several B-29 still exist in museums today. Visitors can walk under their wings, stare at their size, and read signs about their role in ending the Pacific War. Some museums mention the factories that made the parts. Most don't. The focus stays on the aircraft, the missions, and the crews. The workers stay unseen, but what they did was real. Without the nacelles from Cleveland, the B-29 campaign would have failed. Without those 13,772 nacelle assemblies, engines would have overheated and seized. Bombers would have crashed into the Pacific. Missions would have turned back. The war might have lasted longer. An invasion of Japan might have happened. Projected casualties range from 500,000 to 1 million Allied dead, and possibly millions of Japanese military and civilian deaths. The nacelles from Fisher Body Cleveland helped prevent that invasion. Whether that justifies the firebombing campaign is still an open question. Historians still argue about the morality and necessity of bombing Japanese cities. The debate will likely never end. No clear agreement exists. No easy answers appear. But the workers who made the parts were not philosophers or strategists. They were riveters, press operators, and inspectors. They showed up for their shifts. They kept quality standards. They believed precision mattered. And they were right. Precision did matter. Every nacelle that worked correctly was a nacelle that didn't fail. Every engine that ran properly was an engine that brought a crew home. The link between factory work and combat was direct and measurable. 14,000 workers, 3.5 years of production, 13,772 nacelle assemblies, no monuments, no medals, no national recognition. Just the quiet knowledge that they contributed, that they showed up, that when the country needed industrial strength, they provided it. that when precision mattered most, they delivered precision, that when lives depended on quality, they kept quality standards under impossible pressure. The story of Fisher Body Cleveland during World War II is the story of American industrial mobilization. It's the story of ordinary people doing extraordinary work through dedication and skill. It's the story of a generation that changed from peacetime workers into wartime manufacturers in just months. And it's a story that deserves to be remembered. Even when there are no plaques, even when the factories are gone and the workers have died, even when the only evidence left is in archives, declassified documents, and scattered photographs, the nacelles flew, the engines ran, the bombers came home. That was the mission. They accomplished it. Subscribe to discover more untold stories of World War II manufacturing. The people who won the war weren't all soldiers. Many never left home. They fought from factory floors and assembly lines. They won through quality, consistency, and exhaustion. Their names deserve to be spoken. Their contributions deserve recognition. Their story deserves to be told. This was Fisher Body Cleveland. This was how 14,000 workers built 13,772 nacelles. This was how they helped end Japan's war. This is how history was forged in steel and aluminum